Hi again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Around the Town with Chuck. My name is Chuck Guglielmo, a weekly interview show where we talk with interesting people around the community. And today we are taping the show on Thursday, May 17th. My guest today is a sports writer from the Star Beacon. He's been on the show before. Still pretty new to the area, and that's Branden Feeney. Branden, thanks for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me on again.
Branden, this is your second year here with the Star Beacon, I believe, covering high school sports?
Still your
first year. Okay.
Did that here in early October.
Okay, so you're getting ready to start your second
yeah.
year. So in your first full year covering the high school sports, as Branden does, I know you cover football, I know you cover boys and girls basketball, you've covered baseball. What are some of the other high school sports you've covered for the Star Beacon?
Recently, obviously, with the spring season going on, did a lot of baseball, softball, track and field. During the winter, I was mostly stuck with basketball. We had a few other writers. They kind of handled a little more of the swimming season and wrestling. I was more of the pure basketball writer. And then in the fall, I did briefly a few soccer games. Like I said, I got here in October, so a little later into the season, did have the opportunity to cover a few soccer games. Obviously, plenty of football, but I'd say obviously the three quote-unquote major sports between football, both girls and boys basketball, and then softball and baseball has definitely occupied most of my time.
There are so many sports to cover. Did you ever cover any volleyball action?
I actually did. I honestly completely forgot all about volleyball. I covered a lot of St. John and Jefferson volleyball at the beginning of the year. So that was actually first time covering volleyball too this past fall. So it was a unique experience, and it was a lot more exciting than I honestly thought it would be.
Of course, being a sports writer, Branden, obviously you like all the sports, but is there one in particular that you like as far as covering it?
As far as covering, see, I grew up a huge baseball fan, and
I knew that. That's why we're going to talk a lot of Major League Baseball.
And when I get into baseball, sometimes it's one of those things where I think I like baseball a little too much to cover it to a point, because I'm always thinking analytically when I'm watching a game, or what would I do, and sometimes I think too much of what I would do instead of watching the game, how it unfolds, because when you follow baseball, there's so many different strategies, and I'm one of those people that's just so honed into my way of playing the game the way I grew up. So I think baseball may be, although it's my favorite sport, I think that one might be a little tougher to cover. Basketball, I'd say, is probably my favorite to cover, just because the pure emotion that you see on the court, it's the one where it's not only just the players there too, it's the one where you actually feel the high school atmosphere. Football, you kind of feel it sometimes, but it's just so much more of a spread out place, where basketball is so enclosed and you just feel that emotion so much more, and it's so much more powerful. So I'd say probably basketball is my favorite to cover.
Mm-hmm. As far as covering the baseball stuff, of course, those games, and volleyball, some of those games, they start earlier, like late in the afternoon. And then you get your football and your basketball games that generally are 6 o'clock in the evening or so. Do you prefer the 4 o'clock starts or the 6 o'clock starts? I know for deadline purposes, probably the 4 o'clock starts.
You know what, you're completely right. For deadline purposes, the earlier the better, but being a sports writer, sports obviously compared to a lot of other news happens a lot later in the day. Especially with pros, nothing happens during the day. All the games are at night, so you kind of get into a rhythm of everything occurring later at night. And personally, I almost feel like I'm nocturnal at this point, sleeping during the day, staying up at night. So I enjoy the fact that you can start your day a little more smoothly with the basketball and the later starts of football. It's a lot easier of a process. But like you mentioned, the deadline, being able to have an extra 2 or 3 hours to work on a piece, to get that much more interviews, not to have to stress or anything like that, it definitely helps for sure. When you get to football season, it gets tough, especially when you cover road games. There's some games that don't start till 7. They maybe last a little longer. Game ends at 10, 10:30. Can't even go back to the office. You have to find the closest McDonald's or something and just write up a 20-inch story as quickly as you can and just send it off, because, like you mentioned, it's such a tight deadline.
Well, you do such a great job at it.
Appreciate it.
Again, this being your first year covering all the sports, has there been, I'd like to hear, being an outsider, what sport would you say, Branden, you see the most fan support? What seems to be the most exciting sport around the area?
That's a really good question. And I kind of mentioned how I didn't have the opportunity to cover wrestling as much as I would like to, but from the outside looking into this past wrestling season and talking to Mike Schaefer, one of our stringers at the Star Beacon, I may have to lean toward wrestling. I wish I had a more opportunity
Really?
to cover that, but
That surprises me.
It kind of seems like from an entire, well, like obviously basketball, you go to a place like Edgewood, they pack the gym. You go to a place like Geneva, they always pack the gym. But you can go to some places, and it depends a lot on the matchup. But wrestling, maybe it's because of the success. I believe we had 4 state champions in the county this past year, and there were another 5, I believe, that qualified for state. So the success of the wrestling in the area may play a little into that, but if there's one thing I wish I covered more, I'll put it that way, it would definitely be wrestling.
Okay, and that's more of an individual sport. So I guess I can see where that might be the case. You mentioned Edgewood, you mentioned Geneva. That question I just threw at you, I bet if you went to each school, they would probably pick the sport that they're the best in to answer that question.
Most likely, that's a great point. That's a really great point.
Yeah, like I'm thinking Geneva. I'm sure Nancy Barble and her Geneva Eagles, that'd probably be the big favorite sport over there. And by the way, we're losing a great coach there in Nancy Barble. What a tribute for her at the ACBF, wasn't it?
That was great for her, and you could tell, taking like a sneak peek at her when it was going on, she didn't expect it, and it was a great tribute. I'm very fortunate, very happy that I had the opportunity to get here in October to talk to her for a full season, watch her team play, because even though you only get to speak with a coach 5 or 6 times throughout the season, when you're covering 18 different teams, when you count the boys and girls, you still grow a connection with them, and you can see the way how much Nancy actually cares about her players. And I mean, you talk to some of her players as well. Haley Peoples O'Neill, for example, they had so much good things to say about her. You could really see what kind of effect she had on that program.
Yeah, a true legend, and she surely will be missed. Of all the county schools that have you been able to cover every county school in one sport or another so far in your first year? I know it's kind of tough to do that in 1 year, but have you seen every county school play some kind of a sport?
I've seen everyone play at least one sport. Football, I missed a lot of teams. Didn't get to see everyone play football. Basketball is kind of here and there, but every school I at least got to see them play one sport so far, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, how does that work, Branden? Of course, Mike Greco, who's been on our show many times, is the sports editor of the Star Beacon. Does he assign where you go, or does he give you some games and you pick, or how does that work?
It depends week by week. If there is obviously if there's a big game that needs to be covered, he'll tell me, go cover that, or if Mike Schaefer's able to cover one of our other stringers. If something needs to be covered, Mike will straight up say, all right, we need this one covered. Or if there's a big county matchup, if Lakeside is facing Edgewood, if Conneaut is going against Grand Valley, when there's 2 local teams, that's something you want covered. When it's not necessarily a big game, we do try to spread the wealth around. Obviously, sometimes, especially this baseball season and softball season, with the weather and all the postponements, it was really difficult to get the games, because you mark off your calendar, all right, today we're going to go to Grand Valley, tomorrow we're going to go to Pontotoon Valley, the next day Conneaut. Well, next thing you know, Pontotoon Valley and Conneaut are canceled, and then you have the rest of the week spread out for a bunch of other games, and then you end up missing one of those teams as a result. So it definitely becomes an issue in that sense, but for the most part, it depends. For example, this week, you mentioned today's Thursday. Yesterday, Grand Valley Baseball defeated Champion.
Yeah, top-ranked Champion.
Top-ranked number 1.
Good game.
Great game. I wish we were there. And that was one of the problems where Madison softball also had a game, a district semifinal, and Geneva baseball had a district semifinal. So we only had 2 writers to cover 3 games. Unfortunately, we chose the 2 closest locations. Grand Valley being at Niles, being the furthest, we missed out on that one. But then you look at a day like today where Madison is playing in the district championship, Grand Valley baseball is in the district championship, and now Jefferson softball is in the district semifinal. You have to balance those 3 out between 2 riders, so we kind of go toward today. It'll be a district final, obviously weighs a little more than a district semifinal, so it's very dependent on these circumstances.
We've got some pretty good baseball teams out there, and the Jefferson softball team is outstanding. Good luck to Grand Valley. They've won 3 tournament games, so they're going to be moving on. I think they're playing Crestwood today, I think.
Yep, today at Niles. I'm actually going to... I was originally supposed to go to Madison, like I told you.
Or Madison.
Madison at Mentor. They're at Mentor, but without expecting Grand Valley to pull off that upset like they did, that actually changed our plans up a little, and I'll be heading to Niles shortly after the show to
see a good game.
Hopefully so, yeah.
Yeah, Crestwood, of course, I saw in the Star Beacon that they were going into that game at 10-0, so they must have had a lot of rained out games. Only 10 games played.
I honestly didn't see that. I know they beat LeBray pretty handily yesterday in the district semifinals, so they are definitely a good team. But it's crazy because I know I think it was late April or early May, Grand Valley softball still didn't even play a game.
Yeah.
Almost a month into the season because of all the rainouts. So it's been a very interesting spring to say the least.
One final high school question for you, Brendan, then we're going to move on to some pro sports. So I don't want you to miss your tournament game. This year, what one game would you say you covered that was the best game that you've covered this year, whatever sport it was, not including any tournament play, just regular season action? Does one game stand out, or match, or whatever you want to call them?
There have been a lot of games, and I like to.
Just one, Brendan.
I like to think of a lot of them, but you mentioned, is there one that pops up in my head? Once you said that, Edgewood Geneva basketball, I believe it was a December game, and Geneva came into the season with very high expectations, boys basketball, and then Brandon Smith hurt his knee, ended up missing the rest of the season, and Geneva clearly undermanned. Edgewood arguably. I think they proved it at this point, now that the season's over, the best boys team in the county.
Without doubt.
Yeah, without a doubt at this
21
point.
wins.
Yeah, they had a great season. And you kind of went into the game not knowing what to expect. Geneva being that team that came into the season with expectations, Edgewood having them, the game being at Edgewood. And Edgewood started the game, I believe, on a 10-0 run. They scored the first 10 points in the game, and you kind of had that feeling like, okay, we're missing out on what could have been. Next thing you know, Geneva boys, behind Nick Stoltz, who was a do-everything player for their team this year, great defender, great playmaker, great scorer, great rebounder, they stormed back and forced an overtime game at Edgewood, and it was...
I could see why that would be at the top of
it was one of those games where that's why you want to cover sports, for games like that. Edgewood did end up... They were too much to handle in the overtime period. I believe Jake Zapatelli for Edgewood scored 7 points when outscored, honestly, the other 9 players on the court. He just exploded in that overtime game. But that's what high school sports are all about, those county rivalries, two teams going at it. And then when there's also that added drama of almost an underdog type story, and they come back, force that overtime game, that's what high school sports are all about.
Sure is. I had Hayden Kanicki from Edgewood on the show here last week, and I the most valuable player, congratulated him and everything, and 21 wins, you know what he said? We got to get better for next year. That's the spirit, isn't it? We got to get better after having 21 wins.
He has a great head on his shoulders. Yeah, he deflects all the credit. He will not take any credit.
He does not.
And like you said, not only do they think they will get, they're only going to be missing one starter from this year's team, Tyrud, and then Felix Rivera kind of came late off the bench. He was a solid player, but other than that, they're going to have 6 of their top 7 players from next year returning. So that's a scary team to look forward to next year.
That is a scary team to look forward to. All right, let's move on to some pro sports here. The NBA, of course, right now is in their conference playoffs. I see Houston trashed Golden State big time to even up that series 1-1. Of the 4 teams remaining, Brandon, most people feel that Golden State will win again, will win 2 in a row and 3 out of the last 4. Do you feel that way?
I think you have to at this point, until, obviously, with the East, LeBron just doesn't have the help. Boston, I think if Boston had Kyrie and Gordon Hayward healthy, I think there's a good argument that they would be able to actually be the favorite right now over anyone. Granted, you have to take into account, if Kyrie never got hurt, would Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum be playing the same way they are now, because they would have never needed to take on that extra responsibility. But assuming that they are playing the way now, I actually think Boston could have been the favorite. But with those injuries taken into account, I won't believe someone will beat Golden State until I see it. I think they deserve that to this point.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Boston and Kyrie Irving, I heard this. What do you think about this? They feel the Cavaliers would have had a better shot against the Celtics if Kyrie Irving was playing.
I disagree. I think there is
I was stunned when I either read that or I heard someone say that.
I think there's something to be said about that, where a lot of people are saying, well, they're already up 2-0. If Kyrie Irving was there, they'd have no chance. Cleveland would have no chance. I think that may be a little bit of a stretch because, like I said, if Kyrie never was hurt, Terry Rozier wouldn't be playing the way he is right now. Jaylen Brown wouldn't have added on that extra responsibility.
True.
Jason Tatum either. So they all stepped up their games, so you don't know if all their games would have improved the same way had Kyrie never been injured.
Very true.
That being said, you can never, it's hard to expect a player of Kyrie's caliber to lessen a team's talent, or lessen the team production. So you'd assume he would only make them better. But it's an interesting thing to think about. Will they, maybe not necessarily this year, but we mentioned it before with the Gordon Hayward injury. Are those injuries to Irving and Hayward actually going to be beneficial to Boston long term because of the growth and development it allowed Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Terry Rozier?
Because the Cavaliers have arguably the best player in the NBA, and you always hear nobody can beat LeBron James 4 straight times. Does that series go more than 4 games based on what I just said?
I think Cleveland definitely takes, I'm not going to say definitely because you don't.
Not in sports. Nothing's definite.
And here's my problem, because a lot of people say that. You have to beat the best player in the world 4 times. Well, it doesn't matter how good the player is if the team isn't better. And LeBron James, you look at Game 2, for example. He had 42 I believe, over 40 points, triple-double.
And they still got hammered.
But if J.R. Smith and George Hill, your starting 2 guards combined for 3 points, it doesn't matter if LeBron James scores 80.
Right.
If you're not, you can have the best player. Look at Boston, for example. Who was the best player, Boston versus Milwaukee? Giannis Antetokounmpo. Who was the best 2 players, Boston versus Philly? Mm-hmm. Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. It doesn't matter who the best. I think the ring argument, I know we're getting a little off track. I think that takes a little too much credit away from teams, because no matter who it is, the best team usually wins. You have those rare exceptions, like with the 2011 Miami Heat when they lost to the Mavericks, where the best team clearly didn't win. It was just they kind of didn't have that mental edge. But more times than not, it's the best team, not the best player. And I think a lot of people forget about that when they look at how the greatness of individual players. Even the past 2 series, or Golden State's 2 championships, 3 years ago or 2 years ago, the first time they played out, LeBron James was the best player in that court. He made them go 6 games. Doesn't matter because Golden State had the next 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and arguably 5th best player in the series. Right. You look at the series last year, I know a lot of people look at KD. When LeBron was on the court, Cleveland actually had a better plus-minus than Golden State. He sits for 1 or 2 minutes, Golden State goes on an 11-point run, and the game's over. So I think the individual player gets too much credit when you look at predictions of teams winning, and I think that kind of plays a little part of it. But I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland won 1 on their home court, but if Boston takes 1 in Cleveland, it's hard to imagine Cleveland winning Game 5 and extending the series in Boston.
So you're looking at like Celtics in 5?
I would. That's, if I had to make a prediction, I would say so. I would assume Cleveland's role players aren't going to have 2 standout games in a row based on what they've done in the first 2 games. So if Boston can take 1 of those out of Game 3 and Game 4, I'll actually be at Game 4, which I'm excited for. But
it's Monday.
Yeah, Monday. If Boston can take 1 of those 2, it's hard to imagine Cleveland winning a must-win Game 5 back in Boston.
If home court means anything, I know Boston is undefeated on the home court, but they have only won 1 out of 5 road games, for whatever that's worth. So, let's go to the NFL for a minute, Brendan. Did the New York Giants have the best offseason?
That's a great question. It depends how their line shakes up, I believe. They're
certainly got one of the better draft picks in the NFL.
Oh, Saquon? He is going to make that offense terrifying. And here's the interesting part, though, with you look at the Giants. I believe the NFC East is stacked this year. So you got the defending Super Bowl champions in the Eagles. You have the Cowboys, who were the number 1 seed 2 years ago. Obviously, injuries and Ezekiel Elliott's suspension kind of cost them last year. And then you had the Giants, who pretty much have the same nucleus of the team that only lost 2 games 2 years ago. Both of those losses to Dallas, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. And they had their same nucleus back, and arguably a better player than they even had on that team with Barkley. So it's an interesting. The NFC East is going to be interesting to watch, but it's hard to. You can make arguments. The Eagles added Michael Bennett, making that defensive line even scarier. The Raiders added Jordy Nelson, making that offense even more scary. but it's hard to argue against the Giants, I'll put it that way.
Is it hard to argue anything about the Browns' number 1 pick, Baker Mayfield? What were your thoughts on that?
Heading into the draft, me and Mike Greco spoke about it, and here is what I always say. If you believe this quarterback is your guy, you take him, no matter where it is. Even if someone predicts them as a 5th rounder, you take him, because imagine if you thought Tom Brady was your guy, and you were like, you know what, everyone's going to wait till the 4th or 5th round. We could get him in the 3rd round, and then maybe someone takes him 1 pick ahead of you. You look back at those drafts, you look back at Brett Favre, or any of those great quarterbacks, and you redo those drafts, they're always going to be that number 1 pick if you can redo the draft. So my viewpoint is, if you believe he's your guy, you take him. And Dorsey obviously believed Baker Mayfield was the guy. Whether or not he will be, I think obviously deserves its fair criticism. The one thing I will say is I do like the pick of selecting him over Sam Darnold, actually, because I know Sam Darnold was kind of like that consensus, maybe safest pick number 1, but do you really want to play it safe at this point? And you kind of look at what he did. While he does have the mechanics, he got outplayed by Josh Rosen when they played UCLA. He got outplayed by a lot of good quarterbacks. The thing is, he just didn't necessarily make those mistakes. He just didn't have those great games either. So if you're looking for that number 1 pick, you may as well go for that home run, because it wouldn't be a fail drafting Sam Darnold, but you could very well walk away from this draft saying he's the 4th best quarterback.
Do you think he would have been there at 4 if the Browns didn't grab him at 1?
Baker?
Yeah.
That's a tough question, because it depends on the Giants. The Giants.
See, I wanted Barkley.
You wanted Barkley?
And I would take my chances with one of those quarterbacks that were in the top 10 with a 4th pick.
See, if you're not sold on any quarterback over the other, I think you have a great point right there. If you don't believe anyone has edged himself, then you may as well take the best player and then take whatever else is available. But if you do believe Baker's your guy, I can't blame a guy like Dorsey for going if you believe he's your guy. That being said, you make a great point, because say they drafted Barkley number 1. Well, who are the Giants going to take number 2? Are they going to go after Baker maybe as a replacement? Are they going to go after Sam Darnold now that Barkley's gone, or would they go after Bradley Chubb? So I think it depends how the dominoes fall, because maybe they go after Darnold. The Jets at 3 may steal Baker Mayfield, and then the Browns may walk away with out a quarterback they like. Maybe they didn't like Josh Allen or Rosen, and there's a good chance they walk away with a quarterback they don't like. It would be dependent on the Giants, and who knows what the Giants would do, considering they drafted Barkley if he went off the board of the Browns. So I'll put it this way: if the Browns went with that strategy, I wouldn't blame them, but I think it's fair to say they'd be playing with fire. And that's always when you've had the history of the Browns, obviously, with their draft picks over the years. Try to avoid fire, I think, is a good way of putting it.
Exactly. Let's go to Major League Baseball now, Brendan. We'll finish with Major League Baseball. A quarter of the season has been played already, and we're still in the conference finals of the NBA. Figure that one out. But anyway, a quarter of the season has been played, and they usually say after 25% of the season, you kind of get a pretty good feel for what teams are going to do. What's been the biggest surprise for you in Major League Baseball so far this year?
The National League East. No doubt about it.
Atlanta and Philadelphia.
Atlanta and Philadelphia. And I believe I told you before, I grew up in South Jersey. Yes. I kind of grew up a Phillies fan. And
yes.
I felt I was optimistic expecting a 500 season. They only have 16 losses right now, I believe.
24-16, and they're 16-6 at home.
16-6 at home, and I don't believe another National League team has less than 16 losses. So you kind of look at that. They haven't lost. They had the tied for the least losses with the Braves in the National League, which is astonishing, because I don't think anyone saw the Braves doing what they're doing either. And
they're 17-8 on the road.
It's crazy, and yeah, there's numbers, and it's one of those things you look at. They always say hindsight's 20/20, obviously, and you look at the Braves. Baseball is different, where you can have those prospects, especially as of late, come up and make an impact right away. You look at kind of what Lindor did his first year with the Indians. You look at someone like Carlos Correa with the Astros, and Ronald Acuna, and Ozzy. I always pronounce.
I know that leadoff hitter.
Albies
or something like that.
Those
what an offensive player he is.
They are studs, and in a few years.
And their farm system is filthy rich.
It's stacked. I thought the Phillies have a great farm system. The Braves blow them out of the water.
Do the Nationals come back?
I believe they do.
They're still the favorite in that division, though, aren't they? Because of Scherzer and guys like Harper.
How far back
They're
are they?
two back right now.
Yeah, they're two back, and they got off to such a slow start this season, and the way they've been rolling, it's hard
They've won 8 out of their last 10.
There you go. It's hard not to expect them. When you have a rotation with Scherzer, Strasburg, Gio Gonzalez, that's a lot to overcome.
Yeah, that is a big surprise, but I actually found something I think, to me, and maybe when I throw it at you, you might have to say that's even bigger of a surprise. Have you seen the Los Angeles Dodgers record? They are now in last place. They were in the World Series yesterday. Not only are they in last place, they're 16-26, 10 games under 500, lost 9 out of their last 10. Is that a bigger surprise than the Braves and the Phillies to you?
I actually think that is. Now that's a great point,
That's
because
unreal.
You looked at the Braves and Phillies. You were saying, well, they're just not ready yet. You look at the Dodgers. I don't think anyone predicted that. Not only that they would be in last place, I don't think anyone thought they would miss the playoffs. Now, granted, Corey Seager tearing, I believe he had a rotator cuff or Tommy John surgery.
Yes.
Or I don't know if he had the surgery yet or not. So.
And Hershiser's on the DL. I think. Right
Kershaw.
Kershaw. What did I say?
Hershiser. Yeah. Great Dodgers pitchers. They're all like, right? But no, yeah. So they obviously, when you take those injuries into account, it's something. But they still are so talented.
I mean, we're talking about a team that won over 100 games last year.
Yeah. And to be fair, Justin Turner also hasn't played a game yet this year either. Third baseman hit, 330, something like that last year. But
they sit here 8.5 games back. So that's very manageable. I mean, they could still come up there.
Oh,
I do expect them to come up there. I just can't see them staying there.
And even if they don't, because the Diamondbacks are playing great.
They're behind the Padres.
That's the crazy thing. They're behind the Padres. You have to imagine it's going to be hard to catch the Diamondbacks, even the Rockies at this point. But when you look at the wild card spots right now, I believe the Phillies kind of have that top wild card. And whether it's the Nationals or I don't know who would have that second, you kind of, similar how you would expect the Nationals to catch up with the youth of the Phillies and Braves. It wouldn't be a surprise. Obviously, they dug themselves into a huge hole, but I don't think it would be a surprise if the Dodgers ended up taking that wild card spot. And you know what? That one game wild card playing, what better pitcher to have than Clayton Kershaw? So.
Exactly. Another one of my top 3 surprises in Major League Baseball, again in the National, they're on the National League. The Pittsburgh Pirates, 25-17, top their division. Actually, they're tied with the Brewers.
Where are the Cubs at right now?
Cubs, they're right there too. That's a tough division, or balanced, I should say. They're just 2 games out at 22-18.
That's a very balanced, and then you even have the Cardinals in that division too.
Yeah, Cardinals only game behind the Pirates and the Brewers, but I don't think anybody expected the Pirates to be there after getting rid of McCutchen and Garrett Cole.
I think it's fair to say everyone expected them to be last in that division, and I don't think it would have even been close. You could have made an argument obviously easy argument for the Cubs to win the division. Cardinals improved. The Brewers almost won it last year, and they added Lorenzo Cain and Christian Yelich. I don't think Pirates, honestly, you mentioned the Dodgers versus the Braves, Phillies surprise. People saw the Phillies and Braves potential. I don't think anyone saw this from the Pirates, and what they're doing is astonishing right now.
I don't see really any surprises in the American League outside of maybe the Indians being at 500 might be a little bit of a surprise. I really don't. I mean, the Yankees are rolling. They're probably hotter than you can be, and they were my pick to win the World Series. But Mike Greco didn't think so. He thought their pitching would be keeping them back a little bit. But they have Sabathia, Gray, Tanaka, and Severino. Those are 4 good pitchers, and I don't think they need to have great pitchers because of that powerful offense of theirs. They're going to average 6 runs a game. And
the bullpen that they have. You don't have to have your starting pitchers throw 7 or 8 innings. You can throw 5 innings and have a good outing with that bullpen they have. And like you said, I think a lot of times I can see it both ways. Pitching obviously matters. You look at teams like the Giants when they won the World Series with maybe an average offense, but they're pitching. If you can't score runs, you can't beat the team.
Right.
So if you don't allow runs, you can't lose. But that being said, I think Luis Severino is a very underrated pitcher. But last year he finished 2nd or 3rd in the AL Cy Young. Yeah. Voting, Sonny Gray always has had that potential. But you look at a lot of other teams, and they remind me a lot of, again, I'm going to let my bias show a little, the 2008 Phillies, where they have such a fearful lineup. You look at players like Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, and Didi Gregorius. It's kind of comparable to Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, and Jimmy Rollins, where you have such a powerful offense, and all the Phillies really had was one ace, Cole Hamels. Other than that, they used Brett Myers, Jamie Moyer, and Joe Blanton. They just had guys that got the ball to the bullpen, where Brad Lidge finished the season without allowing he never blew a save all season long. So
Jamie Moyer, who threw that blazing fastball about 78 miles an hour,
Right.
getting people out like crazy. Doesn't matter how hard you throw it, as long as you get them out. Right?
exactly.
I guess you could say Houston is another World Series candidate, but I'm taking the Yankees because of what I just said. Plus, we haven't had a World Series repeat in about 17 years.
Yeah, Phillies came close in 08, 09, but other than that, I guess it would be, the 2000, 2001 Yankees since the last time we saw that. And the AL is going to be fun to watch this year. I mean,
The American League?
Yeah, the American League, because the Red Sox would pull it off. They have Chris Sale, David Price can find his old rhythm. They have obviously an explosive offense. Like you mentioned, the Yankees wouldn't be a surprise. The Astros, the reigning World Series champs, I don't think that would be a surprise. The Angels even. The way Otani's pitching, and you have the best player in baseball.
Yeah.
And then obviously, like you mentioned, the Indians, while they're struggling now, they have the benefit of probably being in the weakest division in baseball from top to bottom. So I don't think there's any fear of them making the playoffs. And once you're in, you're in.
Did I hear you say the Angels have the best player in baseball? That was going to be my next question for you. Who is the best player in baseball?
Mookie Betts is making an argument to be had right now. The way he's playing, but
13 home runs.
The way he's playing, that's a hard. If someone says Mookie Betts,
Can't argue.
Yeah, you can't argue. But
I don't know if I'd pick him, but you can't argue.
I'm still going with Mike Trout right now until I see differently. I know he hasn't had his best average year this year, though. I think he's still flirting with a 300 batting average, which is just a credit to him that you can say that's an off year. But with Mike Trout, the defense, the power, is just remarkable. And it's way too soon to say this, and it's kind of upsetting me that people are jumping on, because the thing with baseball success is its prolonged consistency, which makes great players, because anyone can have a great 1 year, a great month, but it's the consistency that makes a great player. If Ohtani can keep up what he's doing on the mound and at the plate, Shohei Ohtani, but he had 11 strikeouts the other day, and he's hitting 5 or 6 home runs. You almost basically have an extra roster spot because of him, because you have that DH and pitcher taking up both. And it'll be interesting to see his WAR at the end of the year, because obviously WAR is a cumulative stat, and it builds up through the year. So most, like, Trout will have the defensive WAR and the batting WAR, but then you look at pitching WAR is so valuable. It's going to be interesting to see his wins above replacement at the end of the year, how much his pitching and offense combined to put that over, because we've never seen anything like that before.
Brandon, who's the best pitcher today in baseball?
Bartolo Colon. He's actually been great so far this year.
What is he, about 50?
This feels like it. The way I'm going to go with Max Scherzer. I think with Kershaw's injury, I think you have to take that into effect. Scherzer's been consistent through the past couple of years. Kershaw's been an injury liability, and also he hasn't obviously had the most success in the playoffs. Not that the Nationals have either, but I think Scherzer is that player that you can almost count on to give you 7-8 straight innings, almost flirt with 10 strikeouts on any given night. That being said, Justin Verlander.
I was just going to say, the rejuvenated Justin Verlander ever since he went to Houston.
He has an ERA under 2 right now, I believe.
Yeah.
And
shut him out the Angels last night.
Yeah, so it's Justin Verlander, he's one of those guys, 1 year he's great, next year, especially when he was in Detroit, next year, okay, I guess his time is over. Follows it up with another great year, follows it up, okay, I guess his year's over. And now, like you mentioned, Houston rejuvenated him.
He hasn't pitched against Cleveland yet. The Indians seem to own Verlander, but it'll be interesting to see how they do with him now that he's in a Houston uniform. I mean, they really got a good record against Justin Verlander for whatever they got, like 22 wins against him in his career. Brendan, this has been fun.
Always.
I'm going to get you back on a show again, if not this show, maybe the morning show. Good luck in covering the tournament game, and go Mustangs.
Hey, it could be a great day for some Ashtabula County teams plus Madison, so
yes,
should be a good day.
Branden Feeney, sports writer of the Star Beacon, my guest today on Around the Town with Chuck.